Houston, I'm John Herder. It's Tuesday, the 9th day of March. Great as always to have you along, everybody. In a nutshell, From the Experts is a compressed virtual networking accelerator, helping people across industries very quickly in a brief, moderated, interactive show format. It's like a TED Talk, but with networking. So what's in it for you? Well, the FTE promise, if all goes well, your curiosity's piqued, new ideas come to light, and you may have helped yourself and the other guy get to the problem faster, reach the opportunity faster. Network has never been more important to your business. Now, folks, help me welcome our guest expert, Amy Henry. Amy's CEO of Eunike Ventures, an energy hybrid technology accelerator with a unique approach to venture capital. She's got a deep, rich background, energy, finance, venture capital, and accounting with firms like Petronas, Shell, Ernst & Young, and several startups, including her own company. If you don't know her, you're going to want to meet her and be sure to connect with her on LinkedIn. So Amy, the global CO2 footprint, let's reduce that by investing in clean tech technologies into our infrastructure and our way of life. Hey, simple to cover in 45 minutes, right? No.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, thank you for having me.
Pleasure. What are you going to tell us about today in our 45 minutes?
Well, I'm going to try to stick to a few slides, talk a little bit about what we do in our activities, and then in the context of what we're doing in clean tech and net zero, even though we like to get sometimes in industry a bit semantic about that definition. But anyways, Eunike was launched in January of 2019, and like John has said, myself and the rest of our team, we're all from industry. You know, predominantly most of my career was spent with Shell, and also working, on the commercialization of technology, working with the labs. How do we scale it up? Why do we fail so many times? What are these different commercial models? Are there different ways of commercializing technology? It's an age-old industry problem, right?
Right.
So essentially, Eunike is a hybrid accelerator and venture builder. And so, like I said, we're run by industry people. We're backed by industry. We have one of our partners, Miss Diane, speaking from Technique FMC. It's about an open innovation collaboration model with a field trial focus on, and working with startups all the way through commercialization. So part of this, and especially with the push for clean tech, we're looking at basically deconstructing the funding model, right? As the investment cycle needs a much longer life for clean tech, are there other avenues in which we can create those needed investments for clean tech technologies to kind of survive that runway? So just to give a flavor, we work the whole value chain, and we work on specific industry problems of our partners. This is all defined by them. So it is a combination of, your traditional, digitalization of the oil field, Industry 4.0, but then they also work on, longer term problems from hydrogen CCUS, materials, carbon sequestration, biofuels. It goes across the array. So we at Eunike, we don't see, a lot of times people like to put clean tech in one bucket and ESG in another bucket. For us, those two are linked. You can't do one without the other. So, even we've got some of our industry partners that are, immediately investing in the clean space with hydrogen and CCUS, where others are tackling, the ESG component and working on longer term. How am I going to address, or what space do I want to play in the new energy, economy that's coming up? So I'm not going to read all of this, and John will kind of post this, but basically this is a global challenge, and this is going to take unprecedented collaboration, right, from all parties of the ecosystem, right, across academia through innovators, incubators, accelerators, industry, investors. And I'm not kind of negative here. It's just if we take a look at where we need to be, with the 2050 target, we have a long way to go. I mean, kind of if you look at some of the technologies that are at the prototype and demonstration kind of phase, there's only 35% of those technologies there. Of the additional 40% of those rejections, they haven't been commercially deployed yet on a mass market scale. Right. And one of our big partners is Canada, especially with our new partnership. So, if we pick Canada as an example, they invest $1 billion each year in cleantech, and 75% is coming from the petroleum part of the economy, right? And that's another reason why I say you can't look at the two separately. And we have an important relationship between the U.S. and Canada as well.
Right.
So what we do is we look at, the end to end of this, right? Of this innovation cycle and the nutrients that you have to have, and the amount of investment as you go from, the ideation stage all the way up to the full commercialization. Unlike, kind of other energy tech, that investment horizon is going to be, in some cases, will be on 10 years, right? And it's a real question of, who are the right investors and participants in order to commercialize these technologies. And I thought I'd throw something up from CERAWeek. We've got lots of people involved in hydrogen, but, it's a reminder to everyone, there's still a lot of infrastructure development that needs to be done, or how do we repurpose that? We still have a lot of efficiencies that need to be built into this process. Even, Shell, who's been at the forefront of hydrogen, it's not going to be everything going to be there by 2050. I just do this as a quick show up because on the right-hand side, if I look at my TRL, which is technology readiness levels, for traditional energy companies, we usually start doing field trials at a TRL 7. So if you look at CCUS, you can see where the development is in a lot of these technologies. And that's really the starting point when we look at how do we assess technologies. Technology readiness is one. We have to look at the economic viability. And that's really the key issue that we have is the scalability and marketability. So when we go through an assurance process, it is I would say a much heavier process. We have to look at, skills from a traditional oil and gas, from a systems engineering perspective, facilities design. We have to work on the non-technical risk. What are the risks of, regulatory, right? Is there going to be other new technologies popping up that are going to be competing for this? If I pick my hydrogen, there's assumptions on electricity prices, right? Are those assumptions going to hold out for the further development in some of those hydrogen technologies? And then the other thing I would have to say is it really takes a community, right? It's like herding cats in some instances. It's getting, some of the startups who haven't come from energy industry, who have never done, a pilot before, or they've never had to work with an industry partner. We have to work with them on kind of really rolling up our sleeves and helping them. We're working with our industry partners who are addressing many different things and in different spaces on these technologies. It's trying to get the investors to, and it's a very risky area, is how do we get the appropriate funding down to the startups as they begin this journey? And it's not an easy process, right? I don't think anyone has the answers. I think everyone is trying to do the best they can, but the big thing is the global collaboration, right? That's going to be required in order to basically move the needle in this space.
Yeah. So, Amy, one of the things Clive brought up is, hey, what really defines the urgency here? I mean, this is massive. So how do we measure what's defined?
It is massive.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think that there's been a big push. I like to remind people. So I am at Shell. So I was with Shell even. I'm trying to remember what years, probably 2004, 2005. We had wind, solar, and power, right? And it was during those times when our institutional investors said, drop those activities, right? We have to look at, how is our industry financed, right? We have to worry about dividend policy, right? We have to worry about, cash on hand. Where do the investors want, the companies to invest? So, there has been a long history of investing, but now there has been a push, not only from the investor community, but you have a new consumer push, right? Society, right, has is a new party to this mix, also pushing some of these issues as well.
All right. Can you talk a little bit about your company's business model and how you get compensated? This is something that's coming from Andreas Matsuko.
Well, we've actually, we're all the time pivoting, right? I mean, I feel like, that's why it's easy for us to work with startups, right? We tell startups, we don't ask you to do anything that we don't do ourselves, right? And so with our new Canadian partnership of kind of building this global platform, kind of a seamless process end to end. And what we're going to do is we typically kind of work like a typical accelerator, like a Techstars, where we would take a percentage of equity, or we'd hold a right of first refusal, or even if we deal with later stage, we might take a percentage of revenue or royalty. But given the importance of this and the long life, we aren't going to take anything from the startup. We feel the importance of keeping that startup whole as possible, through that, for this whole commercialization process. So we have corporate sponsors. We have our industry partners that pay an annual membership fee. We also, have the I call deconstructing of the venture funds. So we have venture firms, paying a membership fee to look at these technologies, but what we're doing is basically de-risking them, right? And it's expensive for them to build a technical team up internally, right? And then, other organizations that we work with. So we work with, Israel Trade Organization, we work with Norway.
Right.
So it's getting everyone to have skin in the game and to share a bit of that burden, right?
So this assurance process was the element that you had to get into and kind of share, well, what's the sticky difference between doing this with the regular tech versus clean tech? And what's your take on that? What makes it different? What makes it harder? What needs to change?
Well, I think, one of the big things, and even this was a big issue, I would say, with unconventional technology, when Shell developed looking at the non-technical risk, right, with the technology, is because it involves with so much on dependency of future markets, right, not knowing what that potential supply and demand, where it could shift, right, what's going to happen with regulation, what roles are the governments going to actually start to play in this. And you have this public aversion, right? Are people actually, the consumers going to make that choice for the clean tech? I think Diana hit some of it. I mean, we had this big discussion when Texas had that big storm, right? Talking about the new mix, right? And the reliability of that product, right? Right now, the pricing differential is not there, right? In terms of your choices that you have, right? And then you're talking about a whole system, right? With clean tech, you are building basically, new business models and new economies, right? Whereas, if I have a digital solution in a traditional oil and gas, industry sense, that market is pretty much defined. My customer is pretty much defined. But it's a different world when we're dealing with clean tech.
Right. And you'd mentioned about mindset, right? This was one of the things that I wanted to bring forward. I mean, because we've got a lot of different people in this value chain. We're talking about, influencing the end customers that make things from hydrocarbons. That's the space that you're working with, from investors to oil and gas service companies, to the operators, to the startups. So, there was one thing or a couple things you could do there to change the way it's classically done. Where would you start focusing, or where are you focusing?
Oh man, that's tough, right? It's really tough. When we first put Eunike together, it was getting to find, it wasn't about the industry players themselves. It was really about the mindset, right? How much were they willing to try to, roll up their sleeves and actively participate, right? And I think that's really the key thing. I think you need much more industry participation, right? with active participation in this space, kind of willing to try new things and fail fast. And then share. So our industry partners share with one another, right? So when we do a field trial, those results are shared, right? They're all working out, how do we make it easier for new technology to get trialed? How do we get away from the 70, 80 page kind of MSA? Ensuring that we don't take IP from these companies.
Right.
How do we, collectively and individually work as an industry to make it an easier journey, right? For this long pathway that these startups have to, to increase the probability of success, because the failure rate is so high.
Right.
And part of our job is to work with them all the way through commercialization.
Yeah.
So it is getting more participation from industry, right?
Exactly. And so I figured we'd roll right into the poll. These are things that we're curious what you guys out there, what your experience is. So kindly take a minute as we're walking through these things. I mean, as a consumer, how much are you willing to pay more for Cleantech? So this gets real fast. Amy, why don't you kind of walk us through your thoughts on these questions, and when I see there's enough people responding, I'll
yeah. I mean, the first one is, I kind of said, okay, let's just do this because, going to just general innovation, right? And it's also then, the long discussion we have with the startups, right? Even if they have a successful field trial pilot, the biggest failure rate is that adoption period, right? Right. It's a real question of, okay, you proved out the technology works, it's viable, but then sometimes it's kind of the behaviors, right, and mindsets. So, the organization may not be ready for your technology, right? Or it's a matter of, change management, and those are costly decisions. So, same thing is when we talk about Cleantech, it's the changing of your purchasing decision. Am I willing to pay more, right, for renewable power, and that switch over? So it's a question of, where does the end consumer feel about, are they willing to pay a slightly higher prices, for these products?
Right. That's interesting. You said something that we talked about earlier, which is that adoption rate. So if the business unit manager, if he or she doesn't, really buy into it, that integration never happens for the Cleantech that was invested in to actually make a change and reduce the CO2 footprint. So that's one of the things that I know you guys struggle with a lot, is to get that alignment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we all, I'll just give you an example, wherever you go, you like to sit in the same place, if you go somewhere, it's like, hey, that's my seat, right? We're creatures of habit. Right. And for some of these, you get used to way of doing things and approaches, and how do you, there's a lot of technologies today that people haven't adopted, right? Just because, there's a choice right now. Everyone has a car, right? It's available at fairly low cost, but some people, choose not to. They've got other alternatives like walking, right? Taking transit. So it's those consumer choices.
Okay, this is what everybody ended up coming in with. Looks like you can walk us through that, but
yeah, I kind of expected that. I would expect to have a kind of plus 10%. Most people would, if I had to guess. But I think number 2 is quite interesting, right? Of where we think, the holding period is going to be for Cleantech investors, right? We, of course, traditional VC, typical, kind of 3 to 5, right? So, we know for certain, that holding period obviously is going to have to extend, right? We have governments like Canada investing heavily in their, clean tech and building out those clusters, which also helps quite a bit, through that runway.
Right. Hey, Amy, pull down your presentation. Go ahead and take it down.
Mm-hmm.
And then keep going. Sorry, I've got a couple questions coming in here while you do that. One question from David: how do you manage the risk of unintended consequences? For example, wind requires backup gas plants, but how do you account for the building and operation of those backup plants, the associated carbon footprint, or when it comes to the impact on the environment when the technology is decommissioned, right?
Yeah. I mean, so that's where I would say, I mean, for us, that's where that whole risk management plan, I mean, that is a living, breathing piece that has to be embedded, right? And that's why, you know, our team has to work hand in hand with a lot of these clean tech companies. You know, it's not just traditional, it's ever changing. It's tied to your technology roadmap, to the choices that you're making, to all the scenarios that you're running, right? HS&E is just as important, if not more, right? It's still another energy source that has to be addressed, right?
Right. So then we have one here that talks about from Regan. He says, "Hey, my wife and I sold both of our cars and do not drive, only Uber, and we don't plan on buying a car again because we have no use for one." So there you go. That's a change behavior.
Yep,
Yeah.
that's a change in behavior.
And then we talk about Matt Bell from Strategic Peace says, "Hold period at which level of investment? Question mark. At the angel, at the VC, PE, large? Do you expect it to be greater than 10 years at one or more stages?" I think the answer is yes. Why don't you talk about the length of these things?
Yeah, I'm gonna invite Matt to join me. Yeah, because he's also another ex Shell person from me. He used to work in Shell Technology Ventures as well, right? So you know, I think a lot has happened in the investment community. I mean, if you just look at traditional investments, you know, angels are really not angel investors anymore. You know, your VC funds have grown into very large VC funds. You have very few micro VC funds, right? You have other alternative investments that startups are choosing to utilize, right? Family offices are another one of those alternative. You know, there's other ways of financing. And then you also have your CVCs also investing in funds more with clean tech besides their own, you know, individual investments, right? So that they can, you know, you're basically kind of placing your bets on a multitude of technologies, right? So, you know, and it's expensive. So, like, even on some of the CCUS technologies, even kind of getting up to that pre-pilot, I mean, you're going to spend more than $50 million, right? That's pretty costly. Um, and that's all risk, right?
Right.
So, you know, who are the most appropriate people to kind of, you know, hold that risk, right? And take that. At the end of the day, it's economics, you know, you've got a cost of a capital. I mean, even Engie's been saying you right now, they're good with kind of a break even, but you know, they're going to have to show a return, right? And this is where they say in Europe, a lot of the hydrogen technologies are still on the drawing board because there's not enough investment for to get those, you know, technologies to that next phase.
Right.
But I
So,
love. Go
yeah,
ahead.
exactly. No, I was just going to say, let's go ahead and close this off, the Q&A portion, and let's get to what everybody looks forward to, which is the FTE Ask and Give. So, Amy, if you had something to ask of the group, what is that?
Oh, to ask.
Yep.
Oh, I would say if you're from the energy, you know, sector, I mean, I think nobody has the answer, right? Besides the work that we do, you know, we do donate a lot of our time. You know, we spend time working, you know, mentoring companies from like NREL out in, you know, the government labs. It's thinking of different ways to approach and putting some skin in the game, right? Or if you want to get involved, I would say reach out to us, and there's lots of different ways we can get you plugged in because there's more than enough work to be done in this space.
I think that was your ask and give in one piece there.
I
So
know, wasn't it? Do you
that
like how I crafted that up?
was amazing. So thanks. So let's move right on to today's show, which is brought to you by our underwriters, Porter Hedges, attorneys at law, and the informed choice for complicated litigation in the energy business. Intrapoint, the integrated software solution experts for continuous operations and emergency response, protecting what you care about most, people, profits, brand, and environment. Unique Adventures, how do you like that? Eunike Ventures, the energy hybrid technology accelerator with a unique approach to capital, and Alliance Benefit Group, building retirement plans for your business at work. So, like most competitors, you too are looking for smart places to spend your marketing and trade show dollars to increase online presence with targeted decision maker influencers. FTE's monthly subscription service gives you a unique virtual channel to your decision makers. Interested? Hey, talk to me. So let's roll right into our group networking session so we can learn from your experiences out there, everybody on the call today. And just as a reminder, when it's your turn, hey, ever so briefly introduce yourself, your business, along with your take. It's a real pleasure and our good fortune to have Dr. Diana Grauer, Director of Research for Technip FMC, to lead this discussion. Hey, Diana, how are you?
Hi, everyone. So I'm with Technip FMC. We are an oil field services provider. We've been in the news quite a bit lately. We've spun off an engineering and construction group into a company called Technip Energies. We're actively looking at startups in this space. We're actively looking at clean tech. What I'd like to see to ask the group is, what kinds of technologies have you seen that really get you thinking about clean tech in the energy space and what we need to actually do? This is a group of smart people. I'd like your feedback.
So we have Kenley or Mojo. Anybody want to talk about this out there and share your opinions?
I can definitely say something that is probably not usually considered in the ESG space, but came up a couple of weeks ago in a conversation with one of your competitors, Diana, one of the other major EPC firms here in town. They have a new VP of sustainability, and we had a discussion around the Scope 3 carbon emissions. That if you are an EPC or if you're a major operator and you have thousands of suppliers who are selling you stuff every day, whether that's pipes, valves, fittings, cement, mud, you name it, there is an associated carbon, an embedded carbon that's associated with that. And so one of the things that she and I discussed was the ability to capture and measure that carbon. It's probably a little further off. I think most people are a little bit more focused on Scope 1 and Scope 2. This falls into Scope 3, but at some point we'll probably get there. So it's kind of out there, and it's probably not at the top of everybody's head. It's not hydrogen, it's not batteries, it's not all the cool stuff, but it's one of those kind of down in the trenches things that I think will come up at some point in the future.
I would agree. We're already hearing Scope 1 and Scope 2. Technip FMC has made appropriate, at least I believe, appropriate promises to handle Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions and actively reduce them. We have not tackled Scope 3. So in terms of clean tech, how are you integrating clean tech into your businesses to hopefully bring down those Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3? Is anybody willing to share what their business is doing currently?
While you're thinking about that, Diana, please explain for those that are not in this space what Scope 1, 2, and 3 are.
So Scope 1 and 2 relates directly to the emissions from the business. Scope 3 is from the supply chain, typically. So for example, Technip FMC, we operate vessels. We would include in Scope 2 our diesel emissions from our vessels. What we would not include is the diesel emissions from the tugboat that help us get into port. That would be a Scope 3 emission. I don't know if that's a helpful analogy, but that's how we look at it.
Well, and I think this is some of the discussion that we have with our industry players, is when they're looking for technology or if they got a strategy, is really understanding what is their desired outcome instead of activity, right? So, you know, when people use this term net zero very loosely, right? At the end of the day, what are you trying to measure? You've got a carbon footprint in cement, right? And just building, you know, a plant, a facility, right? And sometimes, you know, from, you know, your own individual activity, you know, you may say, okay, I've reduced my carbon footprint, but, you know, further down in that system, you may have actually increased your carbon footprint, right? So, you know, that measurement is a very, very important aspect. And that's where we see also this collaboration. We cannot look at things as pointed solutions. We have to look at the system as a whole, right? And are we moving in the right direction?
So when you look at your firm, you know, how are you approaching the appropriate energy mix for what you do? You know, when I bought my new home, signed up for electricity, you know, I was given the option to have the 10% Cleantech. I didn't do it because I didn't see a price difference. There was no price difference between conventional electrical generation and the Cleantech. But maybe I should have. Maybe there are other opportunities there. Are there, you know, things that your firm is doing to approach your own emissions footprint?
Anybody like to step in and share what you're doing from your own company's perspective? This is a very large.
We're very quiet.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll admit I didn't change the energy mix at my house, you know, because I've been kind of, I guess, you know, from the oil and gas. I'm so risk averse, right? And I think this is part of our core nature. How much do I want to take a risk on you know, the energy mix in terms of, you know, that supply, right? You know, maybe I should, you know, after this whole Texas storm, I'm like, maybe I should really kind of relook at this and really look at, you know, truly what the options are. But I think, yeah, and there's a lot of companies now in Houston, right? And working with corporates, right, on, you know, how to, you know, change, you know, the usage of their buildings to become, you know, the purchasing of the energy, you know, for their offices and other activities, right? So there are a lot of firms coming down to Houston and establishing here.
All right, so Adam dropped in the chat, hey, he's representing a small business. He's driving about 70% less for his business than he was before. So that's one way. People are just doing that less.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say my footprint has gone down significantly now that we all have Zoom. And my, not just driving, but flying. We're not flying as much. That's a different generation mix. Though I do have to tell everyone, I am looking at a Generac for my house after the Texas storm. So that may offset my travel carbon footprint a little bit once I have my own diesel emissions out back.
Right,
So,
exactly. Are they diesel?
Diana, when you said you were looking for new technology and stuff, does Technique FMC troll things like Start Engine or Greentown Labs, or are you looking at all those?
Absolutely. I scrape as much out of Amy and her team, as much out of Greentown Labs, as much out of the Canon, the Ion as I possibly can. Absolutely. You know, the challenge that we're seeing in the space for startups is that they have really, really big problems to solve. You know, this is not something like, I want a different version of Salesforce, so I'm going to come up with my own digital solution to displace Salesforce in these 5 companies. These are big, big problems, and they require a lot of investment, as Amy said. They require a lot of hardware, and hardware is expensive, and hardware takes time, and hardware takes people, and people take money.
Yeah.
I think
I
Diana
would suggest if you haven't looked at it to look at Start Engine, because there's a lot of, sometimes they're a little bit farther along and they're very unique technologies. And tell Doug hi from me, because we're old Slummers Week comrades, and tell him he needs to get something going there.
I will do that. I will do that.
And one thing I was going to add, Diana, because we kind of talked about this before, is, that the concern if we don't do this, I mean, like, especially on the hard tech, right? So we've got some really good hard tech investors. Some of them are actually coming from Silicon Valley, some are from SpaceX, but, they cannot do it alone. And, concern is we see some of them just kind of giving up and dropping out because they do need, industry to kind of partner with them at a very, very early stage, right? So, we've got great options with like ARPA-E where we can write letters of support and, they can get a couple $1 million for grant, but it's also important for industry to help them navigate, right? As they need to build out some of this hard tech, right? They can't wait for them to do it on their own because they're just not going to have the bandwidth.
I have a question. Hi, this is Tatiana Kolosivsky, Just Energy. It's a pleasure to be here. I have a question for everyone. As we're discussing these possibilities, the future, I have a question about budgeting for the renewable energy, for example. How the company can go to offset their emissions from usual electricity pricing to address emissions and buy renewable electricity, because it is a little bit more expensive, and how that price difference can be budgeted. How does it work actually internally in companies? Because right now what I see on the market is that companies are opting out for cheaper rates for better electricity pricing. And what are the drivers, internal drivers, to opt out towards renewable? And unless companies, of course, announced it publicly and they're going forward, and also how long it takes to get to switch to renewable, 100% renewable, 50% renewable. I just wanted to ask that. What do you think? What your thoughts are?
So I work for a fairly large firm. We're about, I think, 3 or 4 billion revenue this year at post-spin of Technip Energies. We are actively developing our plans for that, but it's an incredibly complicated. We don't have a carbon credit system that allows you to just kind of move things through an exchange. So we have to take a really targeted approach. That's why we have promised a certain reduction by 2030 and then a phased reduction beyond that. In terms of budgeting, we do have some budget available through our facilities groups that allows them to sort of negotiate their rates. But again, that's coming from a larger firm's perspective. I'm not sure how it would impact smaller businesses.
So Diana, we have, I don't know, about 3 minutes left. Where should investments be prioritized and why is one of those questions, but how would you like to finish this thing off?
Yeah, so I think I'll just repeat that question for everyone. Where should these investments be prioritized and why? For you, how can we better serve not only our customers, but down the line, if I serve, Chevron, how does Chevron serve you? If I serve Shell, how does Shell serve you? Those kinds of questions are really interesting to me.
So we've got, everybody from Hi Yob, good to see you, from Dow, to Lynn, who's with an engineering company. I mean, do you guys have, where are you spending your money as you're looking towards needing to meet net zero targets in the future? Can you guys share, anybody from that group? You can also drop it in the chat if you don't want to.
I will quickly say that I also see Dave here on the call, Dave Lafferty.
Yeah.
For companies, for a quick and easy, the lowest hanging fruit right now is to use IoT for really focusing on their ESG, right? Because there's some really kind of quick wins that they can tackle now, right? To first take that first phased approach of, the E is really at the end of the day for traditional industry players, your operational efficiency. footprint, amount of time in the field, exposure, all of that. Those are really
Very,
quick wins now.
yeah, you're spot on. The very quick wins are using digital tools to change your behavior. So rather than driving out to the well, you monitor it, remotely. You have more efficient engines and things like that through the monitoring. So these are things that have immediate impact on both your operating costs, but also because you're changing behavior, you're more green also. So that and so those are very quick wins.
Yeah, thanks, David. You have Matt Bell who drops in. Also, is anyone looking at efficiency improvements, right? Rather than just sourcing the same amount of power from new source, right? That's a major push in Europe, but maybe not so much here, right? So that's a struggle.
I think the equipment monitoring world that's where they're all looking at is how can I be more efficient, even like a rod lift operation, which is 3/4 of the wells in North America are on rod lift, and just simple efficiencies around that can yield 25% more production and things like that. So yeah, that definitely those are quick wins because you don't have to build out all this new infrastructure. You just are better using the stuff that you already have.
Well, last word, Diana.
Yeah, actually, Hamid actually had a comment. He's got his hand raised, so I'll let him go.
Hamid?
Hamid, if you're still there.
Yeah, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to participate in this fruitful discussion. Actually, I am in the business development department in Saudi Aramco, and I've spent almost 7 years in Ras Al Noura refinery, the major refinery in the region. And we came through the diesel hydrotreating plant to reduce the sulfur content in the diesel in Ras Al Noura refinery from 10,000 to 500. So I think Saudi Aramco in general, they are moving in the right direction. Also, we are having some initiatives like desulfurization initiative, and they are trying their best to comply with all environment regulations in the kingdom. Also, I am handling, like underground, the underground water injection permits is limited there in Saudi Arabia, and the government is very restricted now to give any additional permit for the company and other player in the market. And they have several parameters needs to be met in order to renew the water injection permit. So I think Saudi Aramco is moving in the right direction.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely, thank you.
Anything else, Diana?
No, I don't think so. I've got a whole page notes here. So
right.
Gotta take those back and process.
Well,
so thank you for that. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, thanks, Hamid, and thanks everybody. That's the last word. So how was the networking today? You or someone interested in leading a discussion, just like Amy and Diana did today. Please go ahead and click on the survey link now in the chat that I just dropped and let us know. FTE actually belongs to you. It's your community, your networking platform. So don't forget to follow up and connect the dots with people after the meeting. If you had a good experience on FTE today, why not share it so we can build the community with others you want to network with? For the newsletters, invite connections on LinkedIn. Okay, go ahead and complete that 6-question survey and you'll receive a copy of today's participant list with their full contact details. Folks, we're out of time. Join us on our next event, March 23rd. This will be business to business cross-industry networking session. Don't miss it. You can sign up right now on fte.network. And finally, thanks again to Amy and Diana. Enjoyed the time we had with you, and for all of you for making this the smartest 45 minutes of your day. Take care. We'll see you next time.